One of the biggest reasons I bought Carrara is the way it allows me to work with Poser and Daz 3D figures directly from the library while also giving me a great selection of quite sophisticated modeling tools. I don't know of any other software that allows us to do all of this so easily. Since then, I've become attached to Carrara for many more reasons beyond all of that. But let's get on with the episode. As easy as it is to bring figures and props into Carrara using the library, we have to understand that we're using an entirely different render engine, which means that no matter how nice the content might look when first loaded, we know that we can make them look much better with some simple tweaks to the materials. So we'll be getting into that in a bit. But first, let's take a look at how I begin this whole process of optimization. In any film or story, the characters are everything. They need to be special. So when we design the characters for our projects, we need to give them everything they need to portray who they are on the screen. To do this, we need a good structure to build from. We need to store them in our browser consistently, looking the way we need them to look. My method for this begins with another base type scene file. I've included mine on my site as a free download so you can see how it works and follow along. But we all have different needs, so please feel compelled to tweak mine to your liking or build your own up from scratch. Let's look at the character template scene file. I'll explain how it works. I have this all set up to be generic, yet easily customized. Once we create a character within this scene, we give the character a name and type that here and copy it. Now we go through and replace the word character everywhere we see it, and we'll have a unique system that can play friendly with all other saved characters or creatures using this same template, all within the same scene. I'm going to drag in Genesis Michael 5. You can bring in whichever character you wish to follow along. Okay, I collapse the hierarchy and place it right here between face target and clothing. Just be careful not to drop character into the face target group. If your figure disappears, you'll know where to look. Let's name this character Bill. So when I type Bill over this line, the camera within the scene will be called Bill. Copy that and paste it everywhere we see the word character. So we end up with Bill Group, a camera named Bill, face target Bill Lights, and Bill Clothing. Perfect. The reason we put Bill between the face target and clothing is because I've found this to be the easiest hierarchy to work with during animations. Again, use your own taste, but we do need to get Bill into Bill Group. That's important, and here's why. Face target Bill Lights is a target helper with 4 lights parented to it. These lights are designed to enhance the character with every scene we put him in, so we only want them affecting him. So they're set to only cast on anything within this group, Bill Group. Now we can rotate the face camera, move it around, etc. to get different lighting for our character. Even more, we can grab the individual lights and move them around, and they'll stay parented to this face target. So the rig works to help highlight our character with as little fuss as possible. To get this to work even easier, let's add one more step. Let's say that this is how we want Bill to look, and this is the size we want him to be. Line up this face target directly between his eyes. Now go into Insert menu and insert a new target helper object, way down on the bottom here. In the Effects tab, drop its size all the way down, and I usually give it a color that somewhat matches the skin of the face. No need to get too crazy on that. In the Instances tray, Drag the new target helper up to the top of the group, select the face target, and then control click the new target helper and align them by typing Control K. Make sure to deselect the face target again and change the name of the new target helper object to something like star star space Bill face align or light align, something that'll be easy to spot. Open the hierarchy for the character and drag this new helper object over the character's head. We've just parented the target helper to Bill's head. We can see it right here, but where we really want to see it is when we right-click on Bill's head. Here's how this works. I'm going to drop in an anti-block to animate Bill, but I don't want to lose his default pose. So first I'm going to move my timeline scrubber to the 1 second mark and then import the anti-block. I also set this spot to be the beginning of my timeline animation to make things easier. For this example, it doesn't matter what I pick, so that'll do. Okay. See how the face target remains in place as the character moves? With Rosie 5, I came up with this idea to parent that new target helper object like we just did. Now we can easily align the face target light rig to this face align target anywhere we need to along the timeline. This gets to be second nature. So I right click somewhere in the head and I quickly see that star star face align. Now I control select the face target, set to frame 1 and control K. Go to the end, control K. Then I check along the path for places where we might need an extra keyframe. Don't worry, Carrara doesn't care how many you place, but keep in mind that we don't need it to follow verbatim. It's okay for the light rig to travel a little. So why this empty group called clothing? You don't need to do this, but I like to put all of my characters' conforming items into this group so I can always collapse them from the tray. It makes it easier for me to navigate. But I'll teach you another trick too. If we put all conforming items in the clothing group and then group that again and close both groups, there are no rig selections from those items available when we right click on the character, which is another huge time saver in most situations. While we're on the subject of groups, let's take this a step further since I've had this issue throughout my whole journey, trans-mapped hair. Let's get an example in here. Oh, Bill. Okay, these lights have soft shadows and it gives much better render, but it can really drag out the render time on trans-mapped anything, but especially hair, where each section has a lot of fine detail transparency to try and work out the soft shadows. So when I had big, intense trans-mapped hair on Rosie, I came up with this solution. Leave the hair on its own within the group. Now open the face target and set each light to everything except. And now select the hair. Now select all of the lights and duplicate them with Control D. With all of these lights still selected, go to the Effects tab, click Shadows, and turn off Shadows. Now edit the name of the second of each light to say hair at the end. Now change everything except to only for these hair lights. Now we're getting much faster renders, but we're also not getting any shadows from the hair onto the figure. We need to rely on the scene lighting of our environment to provide that. Okay, so we've got the basics down so far. Let's get rid of the animation for now and focus on completing Bill so we can save him out to the browser. Let's take a look at costume design. Genesis 1 is actually magic in this regard because with a few inexpensive plugins, we can use clothing from Generation 3 all the way through Generation 7, and that gives us an amazing assortment of costumes to choose from. Let's give Bill this cool costume from Michael 3. Since I bought Gen 3 iconic shapes for Genesis, I get Michael 3 in my dialogue for the auto fit. Now, more times than not, I pick this bodysuit loose option. It doesn't fit the clothes any looser than if we'd chosen tight, but it does give a general volume morph slider that can go positive or negative, which can be very handy. Some items translate through the auto fit process better or worse than others, but it's conformed to the figure, and once that happens we can jump into Carrara's vertex model room and make adjustment tweaks or even change it altogether. Very cool and very powerful. I mentioned Gen 3 iconic shapes just then. If you're looking for plugins, have a look at my website. Many of the ones I use are illustrated there with some of my comments about them with links on where we can get them. I also include some that I'm looking forward to getting in the future. That said, Fenric's amazing plugins for Carrara are now free to the public, and I'm always using them like on a daily basis. I'd like to show you a fun trick, and this is really useful for dynamic clothing using another plugin, Virtual World Dynamics, VWD for short, with Filimo's bridge plugin that allowing it to work with Carrara. Both of those are also linked in my website. But VWD works with conforming clothing as well as the prop type, which is really handy. With this fun workflow, we can use pretty much anything from our library as dynamic cloth for pretty much any character. Even if we need to design something ourselves and we're not a 3D model artist, we can just tweak away. Let's take a look. Let's say that I want this shirt to be dynamic and a bit more blousey in front or whatever. I can actually do that while it's conformed and it'll still work in VWD. But let's say that I wanted to add or remove part of the actual mesh. That would break the conformed object. So how can I do this? With Fenric's plugins, I simply select Model or Actor if it's a DUF item, and then go Edit, Fenric, Unlock Figure. With it still selected, I go to Animation, Detach Skeleton, and then click OK. Now I drag this model or actor out of the hierarchy and then delete that hierarchy since we don't need it anymore. This item is now a prop. It can no longer be conformed. I have an older tutorial available that shows how to take something like this into Daz Studio and turn it into a conforming item once we're done playing with it. So this is truly a powerful method of character costume design, especially if either we aren't 3D modelers or, like in my case, I just don't have the time or inclination to do it. So now I could duplicate a button, make more of them, or delete any of them or anything. I can add a new material zone, just simply shape it around a bit to make it more how I need it to look for the shot I'm after. It's pretty cool. Clothing a character is an easy process, so I wasn't actually going to even mention it. But in the end, I thought it would be best to include those notes that I was just talking about to help you get thinking outside the box when designing your characters. We'll likely be delving more into this type of stuff in future episodes. Let's move on to materials. We'll look at how to get decent basic shaders and then move on to briefly look at some of Carrara's more advanced shader functions. but in this episode we'll only focus on character shaders. Bill is a first generation Genesis figure, otherwise known as Generation 5, as Genesis 1 is Daz 3D's fifth generation of human figure excellence. The Carrara 8.5 upgrade was built around Genesis and was updated into Genesis 2's release cycle. While Genesis 1 is very compatible with Carrara, Genesis 2 is close but not entirely supported. It takes a little bit more thinking outside the box on our end. Genesis came with the ability to swap UV mapping within Daz Studio, but there's not an actual interface for us doing that in Carrara. However, for Genesis 1 at least, we can do that using the library material presets to do the swapping for us. I haven't tested this yet on Genesis 2, 3, or 8, but let's take a look at it on Genesis. So Bill is Michael 5. Watch what happens when I apply a preset designed for a different UV mapping. Looks good, right? Well, now let's see how Michael 5's textures line up with a simple undo of that. Yikes! Okay, while Carrara can undo the material preset, it doesn't undo the UV swap because it relies on the library files to conduct that operation on Genesis. So to get poor Michael 5 back, we only need to use a material preset designed for him. But quite frankly, we could use any preset and it'll automatically swap the UVs for us. This is one of my favorite aspects about Genesis 1 figure. It can wear Victoria 4 textures, which also includes Aiko 4, Girl 4, Stephanie 4, and all of the characters built around them. And that same thing applies for Michael 4 and his whole family, and then Kids 4. Generation 5 is specifically created for Genesis 1, and there are a lot of different characters, animals, and monsters set up for Genesis. It's mind-boggling. It's very important to remember, however, that the standard library material options are not made for Carrara. Genesis 1 materials look okay right out of the box in many situations, while Generation 4 almost always requires some tweaking to get even look right, and Genesis 2 material presets generally don't work at all. None of the ones that I own even load a single texture map. As Carrara artists, however, we'll get so used to fixing that stuff without even breaking a sweat. So for Generation 4 and Genesis 2, for example, just build your shaders the same way I build these for Genesis. You'll have a different structure of material zones. Some might have zones that others don't. It doesn't matter because all of the texture maps that we need are in the same folder unless you're doing more advanced blending options. I've been preaching for years that we all must consolidate duplicate shaders, remove unused objects, and remove unused shaders. I just can't stress that enough. It helps keep this entire workflow free of things that we just don't need. So it's actually a nice workflow to set up that behavior in Carrara preferences. Right there. So let's look at Bill's shaders, his materials. Oh, well, no wonder he looks okay, but kind of bland. He only had his color map applied. Have a look at the rest of this shader tree. See how many of these channels are set to none? I prefer to keep channels that I don't need set to none, so the render engine never has to take even a glance at it. Yes, turning alpha to none is the same thing as an alpha of 100%, but I turn it off entirely if I don't need alpha. Not here, but we'll often see a black color or a value of 0 in reflection. I prefer to set that to none as well. So what are we missing to make this realistic human look realistic? You'll get so used to this that you'll be getting this stuff done without hardly a thought. For a basic, realistic looking skin, we need a basic 4-channel setup. Color texture map, highlight texture map, shininess value, and bump either texture map or normal map if you have one for this texture set. It's nice when we have at least one map loaded in so we can see where it comes from by hovering over it right here. There are times when this doesn't show, so we need to know where our texture maps are. We can use the DAZ 3D install manager for this. Find the item, right click, show installed files, and look for texture path. Or if we don't use the install manager and we're really stuck, just manually download the texture set you want and open the compressed file and check out where it's supposed to go. So we've got the color texture map. Let's go to that location and find the specularity map for our highlight channel. While I'm here, I also look for a normal map. If it has one, then I know to use that in the bump channel instead of a texture map. It makes a difference. Okay, the specularity map is often too bright for dry skin. This is handy for when we need our character to sweat or perhaps just be wet. So go into the highlight channel and turn the brightness map down to 30 to start with. That's my default number, and then I tweak it from there if I have to. Now shininess of 100 is just like turning the specular highlights off. A value of 0 allows light to spread across the entire surface depending on the angle of the light. For skin, I like it really low like that, but often go for somewhere between 3 and 5 instead of 0. As we increase this value, the material looks to be more wet, as long as there's a highlight channel bright enough to allow that. Bump for human skin will vary depending on the characteristics we're going for. Normal maps are usually, or at least used to be, baked from an ultra high resolution model, so they're often best at a strength of 100. But then we can dial that down a little bit depending on our needs. But not all normal maps these days are made that way. There are plugins and applications that can simulate and create a normal map without even having a 3D mesh. So experiment with it. If 100 seems to blow it out of proportion, just back it down and give it another test render. Texture map bump maps are just a grayscale image, but can still do a fine job of making materials look convincing to all but the most scrutinous observer. Just take care not to overdo it unless that's truly the effect that you're after. With any of these channels, we can go beyond a single image or source. Operators can give us many functions like add and multiply, mixer, controlled by any other source, and new to 8.5 is the new multi-layer option, which works very much like using layers in Photoshop. I'll often use these functions when I want veins to stick out instead of going for displacement, which tends to really slow my animation frame rendering down. I'll use the add function so that the vein map adds more height to the bump map as a result. When doing this, I often increase the bump magnitude higher, sometimes even twice as much. Also, keep in mind that sometimes the specular map can be used in the shininess channel, and whenever I do this, I also turn the brightness of the map down to no higher than 25 or 30, which would result in the white portions of the map turning out to be a pretty high gloss. Sometimes I also use operators to tweak the color and highlight channels as well. Our skin is looking pretty nice, but look at those eyes. They're black and very vacant. Let's fix that. Okay, so we'll open the iris shader first and see what we've got going on here. It's a multi-layer system. We're going to look at both of the texture maps that they have in here and take the best one, this one, and drag that right into the color channel all by itself. Okay, let's take a look and see if we have a bump map. Look at that. There it is. So we know we can add a bump map and we don't have a normal. So let's go ahead and add bump texture map and add our bump map. And like I said, this is for the iris, but while we have this all set up like this, let's open up the sclera and drag what we've got so far right onto the top level of the shader so we can copy that over. Now let's go back to our iris and we're just going to control click this color map onto our highlight channel so that we have color in the iris gleam. And to get that light spreading across the iris nicely, we'll crank that somewhere, I usually just go for somewhere between 7 and 12. Okay, and for our sclera we want a decent amount of shine, fairly tight with the shininess, just to have a look at what we've got there. And now for the cornea, what I do is I use our presets from the Carrara library. I use the clear glass shader. Now a lot of times I'll tweak it from there, but in this example just take it and drop it in there. While we're at it, we can use that exact same shader for the tear. Look at that, much better. I mentioned before that standard library material presets are made for software other than Carrara. Carrara also ships with some nice shaders as well. In your shaders tab, look under skin. Carrara 8 came with shaders for Michael 4 and Victoria 4, while 8.5 shipped with additional shaders for Genesis. I also include links on my website to some awesome shader presets for Carrara that we can get online. That's a great way to learn, is to see how other people build their shaders up, and then we can just go in and tweak them to our liking from that point. Many of these character presets use something that I haven't even mentioned because it takes a whole level of understanding and patience: subsurface scattering. Subsurface scattering also adds a lot of time to your render, but sometimes we really need it to convey the scene properly. For my D'Artan Beck and Rosie 5 characters, who are mostly used for fast animation work, I've come up with a subsurface scattering like technique using texture maps and operators in the translucency channel. That's going to have to wait for another episode, however. Well, now that we have this character pretty fleshed out, it's time to save them to the browser. There's plenty more we can do with them, and we're going to investigate further in future episodes. My browser in Carrara looks different because I installed all of the Carrara content files in a different location than the software, so that I could build up my own browser structure by hand using the file folder menu. And I have an article on my website how to create your own custom browser for Carrara without having to do that if everything default. But no matter how you decide to do it, I like to have one spot that contains only my main characters and give each character their own spot within that. In that spot, I'll store the character, but also different complete costume combinations, that group that I have inside the clothing group. When I upgrade the character, I make a whole new spot for the old version and store that still in the browser so I can access it when I need to. But that's it for this episode. Hey, thanks for joining me. We're going to get a lot deeper into a lot more things. We're going to jump into some animations and we're going to have an episode dedicated to virtual world dynamics or VWD. Thanks for joining me. You guys have a great day.